This is Kelly Nielsen here with Grace for Living After Loss. And on this channel, we discuss all things related to grief. What does it look like? What does it feel like? But most importantly, we share tips, tools, and resources on how to move through grief and get back to living a life that you love. And on this episode, we're going to be discussing the topic, the phenomenon that is known as anticipatory grief. So for those of you that may not know, anticipatory grief is the process leading up to someone's passing, when they're diagnosed with a terminal illness and you know at some point it's coming along, and what does that look like and feel like. And I'm so thrilled to have with me Vicki Turperding, who experienced anticipatory grief in the passing of her husband, and she's going to be our expert for today, sharing her personal experience and the things that she learned through that process. So Vicki, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I always love chatting with you. So, and I know you've done a couple other videos for our channel, but in case the folks watching haven't seen any of your other videos, please share with us who it is that you lost and the circumstances around their passing.
So my experience with anticipatory grief, I didn't know it at the time, but my initial experience was when my mom passed away several years ago. She had an illness requiring a lot of care and would progressively decline. And most of that care my dad provided. So he really was kind of at the epicenter of anticipatory grief. And every layer that she kind of slipped, you kind of have a period of mourning where you're grieving ground that is just never going to return. You're never going to go back to what was, and you have to adjust to that new normal, which can be tiring. And it's also a mental shift in focusing on what you can still do and enjoy. So I with my husband, who passed away last July, I had that experience to kind of draw upon, but it was also, it was very different with his death. His my time frame of anticipatory grief with him was much shorter, and it was much more intense because I was his caregiver. We lived together. He was in, my house 24/7. So the loss, the intensity felt much closer because of the closeness, and just he's my spouse, and in my house and taking care of him. And I really think the time frame also had something to do with the intensity, because I was having to process so much constantly for a 2-month period, that it felt much more intense. I had a lot more physical symptoms as well as emotional symptoms.
It is different how close you are versus how far removed. And the other thing I want to touch on or explore a little bit is this concept, this weird concept of time frames, right? Because I know in your husband's case, they gave him a lot longer time period than what he ended up having. And I've had a similar experience with my father, who is still alive, by the way, but he has had so many medical issues and problems that we've been told many times that he won't make it through, or he's at the end. And just the toll that takes on you to kind of constantly adjust and readjust your expectations, your hopes, your plans. Can you talk a little bit about that and just share how they had given him more time than what you guys ended up getting?
Yeah. So we were initially told to expect between 1 and 3 years, but that he was indeed terminal and not medically curable. I kind of knew all along, though, that 1 year mark, even making it that far, was kind of questionable, just because he never really felt better. Nothing seemed to be working. And if anything, he was losing ground. So I just couldn't envision him physically making it that long. But, it's amazing what the mind can do. That's not the reality that you want. So your mind starts grasping for anything to get the very best outcome possible, just so you don't have to deal with it. It's almost kind of like taking a quick trip into fantasy land, just to kind of give your emotions and your mind a break that, maybe this will happen after all. From the very beginning, though, we were very intentional with that time, knowing that it had a big old question mark at the end of it. We really didn't know how long he had. So we had short-term immediate things that we needed to get done. And it was practical things like end of life care, estate planning, um, day-to-day things that we needed to take care of immediately. Then we would kind of bucket other things like, okay, if you were able enough to take a trip, like some bucket list items, what would we like to do? Family members that we'd like to see or have people come here to visit us. So we kind of had like different plans by categories of importance. Practical versus nice, as well as timing was a factor as well.
I feel like you guys did that really well, to be very intentional with the time and talk through prioritizing both practical and kind of your wants. Were you able to scratch any of the bucket list items off, or did you just not have time?
No, unfortunately not. We were able to go out to eat a couple of times. He just never was physically able to be up to doing much of anything. And we never got doctor's clearance to travel, I think, more than like an hour or two away. And he just never really felt up to it. So we constantly, adjusted our expectations and then focused on, okay, what can we do now? What's within our control? What's of critical, most important? And then kind of focus on that. And then gradually started checking items off the list, and also being very intentional about how we spent our time. Um, if there's some silver linings in this or blessings, and I always want to be careful with my words, because it's like this situation is not a situation that any of us would ever choose for ourselves.
Right.
No one's happy to be here. No one is ever glad that this happened, but that doesn't mean that you have to live your life in pain forever, and that you can't have a different life. That life is a gift, it's a miracle. And yes, it's going to look very different, and we all go through hard things. And, this is definitely one of them. And my husband had the same opinion. He was incredibly strong, very empathetic. And from the moment he was diagnosed, he had complete and total peace. And that gave me a lot of peace, because we kind of quickly resigned ourselves to what was happening fairly quickly. So then we could mobilize and get through this, for me, this anticipatory grief stage, which for me, it started the moment he was diagnosed.
Right.
I sat there in a cold, blue, hard chair in the emergency room, and I think I just sat there and just tears poured out for 2 hours, taking this all in. And you begin to grieve, not just obvious of you're going to lose that person in your life, but all of your plans, your hopes, your dreams, like all of that begins to unravel. And at first, I think most people are in some sort of shock, because it's just so much information and it's such an emotional blow. I don't think I really fully absorbed it for a couple of days, because there's things that I wrote or did that I simply don't remember doing now. Then once he came home from the hospital, I had physical symptoms of grief almost from the get-go. The same ones, not being able to sleep, not being able to eat a whole lot. Your mind will race almost uncontrollably. It just, thoughts will come and your mind just starts racing on them. I had this tightness, like somebody had a hold of my sternum, and a sick feeling in my stomach. It was really hard to concentrate on things. You also can go through a kind of like a phase of guilt, thinking about what I could have done better, or what if we did this, or we shouldn't have spent as much time watching TV, or whatever, so we could have gotten more time. Going through something like this, it really makes you think very carefully about how we spend our time. You know, all the times that I worked longer hours trying to make deadlines and get projects in on time and stay caught up, and that time, I sometimes you have to turn things in for deadlines, but a lot of that time is just it can wait a day or two, and it
Yeah.
takes time away from your family. And we had a lot of time, well, 2 months, to kind of talk a lot of this stuff through, which brought me a lot of peace. And I definitely see that as a silver lining that I had him here with me to bounce things off of, or just talk through, what was on my mind, and he would do the same. Um, you experience grief ambushes. Things will trigger you, just like after someone dies, you start feeling scared for the future, hopeless for the future. And this is where beginning to plan what you want for your life after. And this is something my husband did with me. He was very vocal in what he wanted for me, what he wanted for our family, and specifically like what he didn't want me to do, which was
Mm,
sit around and cry for many, many years, and,
hmm
you know, resign myself to feeling hopeless and sad the rest of my life. He did not want that for me. So that gave me a lot of fight early on
hmm
that I don't think I would have had otherwise.
Do you think, and I don't know if you've experienced loss both ways, but do you think that having this anticipatory grief, because you do start the grieving process, like you said, you're hit with the fact that this person isn't going to be here forever, which none of us are, but we all live in the delusion that all of our people are going to be here for forever. But my
Yeah.
point is, you get to begin to process that and analyze that before the person actually passes. So do you think that that has helped you maybe on the backside move through grieving maybe a little bit faster than someone who just gets a phone call or gets the news that their person is gone one day because you had that time? Or do you think that that doesn't shorten the time on the back end? What are your thoughts about that?
That's an interesting question. I think it did for me, just because a lot of this I had kind of already worked through, or had tools or ideas or plans, or I had peace from Michael, what he wanted for me in our family, and things that he was very vocal and specific on. So a lot of that kind of stuff I had time to work through, because I worked it through with him, which is a silver lining. I've not been in a position of having a close loss where you just get a phone call and someone's gone. Thank goodness. But I mean, just from a logical standpoint, I'm sure that helped me, um, if only because I had him to talk to, and that is a comfort. And I'm sure it was a burden on him at times. This had to have weighed on him very heavily to know that he's letting go of all the things that he wanted to do and accomplish, that he just time ran out. And that he occasionally would kind of talk about, but he didn't burden me with that. He was trying to be very strong to not add anything more on me. That's just kind of how he was. One thing that I did early on, try to get a handle on, and I think this is common with anticipatory grief. Like, grief, you can't control. You get so many triggers and things upset you, and you just start crying. And I remember about week 2 into this, I remember thinking, I have got to get this under control, because I don't want to be sitting around crying all the time in however much time he has left.
Mm,
Like,
mm.
I wanted to enjoy that time, not just constantly be sitting around crying, which is much easier said than done.
That has to be such a paradox because they're leaving, but they're still here. So yeah, you want to enjoy the time, but you can't ignore, deny the fact, and then to your point, they're not feeling well and up to really do big, grand things or make fabulous memories.
Yeah, it's so hard to describe, because it's very disorienting mentally, it is emotionally, it takes that physical toll on you. I kind of got to a point of where like my safe space for crying would be like in the shower when I take a shower, in the morning or at night, because nobody was in there with me. And then I wouldn't feel bad if I broke down and cried then. It's not that I tried to hide it from him. I would just remind myself that is this really helpful in this moment? And I would remind myself, that I have the rest of my life to cry, to cry it out, where, he only had a limited number of days or weeks or months, however long it was going to be. But
Right.
it was still really hard because we kept getting bad news after bad news that we would have to then adjust and process. And he was getting to the point he felt so horrible that he was just ready to go. And I understood that. He wanted to fight for me and fight for us and to finish what he wanted to do. But he's like, if I'm not able to do any of that and can't enjoy my family, then, why stick around?
Right. Right. Do you think that people minimize the fact when he did actually pass? Because I'm just envisioning, just as you're processing it, the friends and family and that are aware of the situation, you all have been rehearsing it, the loss, for a little bit before it actually happens. And so I think there's a tendency when the loss does happen, well, it's happened. Instead of the folks that get sudden news, everybody is carrying that big emotional heavy weight all at the same time. Do you understand the question I'm asking? Like, I feel like people would have a tendency to be like, oh, well, we knew it was going to happen. So not that it's no big deal, but they minimize the heaviness or the sting of it just because if someone's punching you in the face and you see the punch coming, it does not make the punch hurt any less. You still got punched in the face. But did you sense that or feel that from people?
So I definitely did with my mom. With my mom, we all felt that she was no longer suffering, that this was a blessing. And we had all kind of worked through a lot of our grief already. Michael's was different, because again, it was that short time frame, and it was so short. We really hadn't told a tremendous amount of people.
Okay.
We had told our closest friends. It was kind of like I don't want to say on a need to know basis, but we kept the circle tight initially because we didn't really know exactly what we were dealing with. And people that have walked this before know that the medical information comes in trickles and it's very slow. Then there's all sorts of maybes, and this could be, and it's on this. And if you're trying to keep 50 or 100 people up to date, it gets overwhelming pretty quickly. So we told our immediate family and our closest friends, and people at my work obviously knew because I continued to work, and some of our friends. And Michael had every intention of, sharing this with everyone and telling everyone. He just died before that point in time came because he was still very early on in his treatment. And there was a couple more tests that he was waiting on. And then once those came back, then he was going to, tell, quote, everyone. And that day just never came. He went much faster than what we were expecting. So we kind of had two camps. There were people that were shocked because they didn't even know that Michael was ill. Then everybody else, I think, was shocked that it was so quick.
So fast, yeah.
That they had that little bit of time to adjust that this was happening, that, there wasn't any hope of a medical cure. So, there was a wide gamut of reactions and how people process this.
Yeah. Now it sounds like you guys did a lot of things right. And like we said, you were very intentional with your time. But I also know that there's some things that you learn only in hindsight and only by going through it. So can you share a couple of the things that you wish you would have known or things you wish you would have done differently for the folks that may be watching this video and are on the front side of the equation?
I wish I would have done a better job of taking care of myself. And at the time, that sounded so selfish because I wasn't the one sick. And we were all so focused on Michael's care and his emotional well being that everyone else kind of neglected themselves, and myself included. I was the line leader in that line. For a long time, it really didn't even occur to me that I needed help or care or to even think
Mm,
of myself. Michael actually was the one that told me a few weeks into this. He's like, look, you've got to do things outside the house that don't involve me and don't revolve around cancer and don't revolve around sadness and grief and
mm,
coming for your own mental health.
mhm,
Because I wasn't sleeping, eating, I was so stressed, my blood pressure went up. So I did make an appointment with my doctor. So that's one thing that I would encourage people to do is when you're facing this, go get with your medical doctor and tell them what's happening, because they can watch, your blood pressure, your vitamin levels, your hormone levels,
mhm.
give you any sort of medication that you might need to help you get through this, whether it's for anxiety or sleep or whatever that may be. My doctor she was absolutely fantastic. It's one of the kindest people that I've ever met. I just love her. So that was really helpful to have her aware of what was going on and kind of looking out for me. And she would remind me of things and to take care of myself. I also took on the job of communications, being the communications manager. Um, Michael joked that I was a spokesperson, and people would, they naturally go to the spouse because they never know, is he in treatment? Is he asleep? Does he not feel well? So they didn't want to, bother him just in case. So they
Yeah.
would come to me or, text or call me to get information or to ask if he was up to taking a phone call. And while that was really nice, when, you're dealing with this yourself and you're trying to work and maintain a house, like at times it gets to be a lot. And I wish I would have had some help with that from someone else that was a little bit more removed from the situation. I set up a Caring Bridge site, and he and I did all the posts on the Caring Bridge site, and that really helped to get
Okay.
information out to who was in the know, because I could just
Mhm.
post it once and then everyone was up to speed.
And I know too that you mentioned, and we don't have to go through the exhaustive list right now, but you learned a lot even through the hospital system and what your rights are and what you can and can't do. And I think that is such, so maybe just share one or two things, because I feel like that is such vital information. And when you're in the midst and you're in that moment, you don't have the faculties to make good decisions or do research or find things or whatever. And for those of you that are watching, Vicki has graciously offered, we're going to compile all of these tools and resources and support guides so that you can print out something and have something physically in your hand to be able to reference back to. And so we will be sure to put a link to that down in the description so that you can get that, because somebody may be watching this very early in their journey or close to the end, and like I learned through my conversations with you, there are some things that even though you guys had so many conversations and you tried to plan for everything, still, even in that case, you kind of got surprised by a few things that you didn't realize. So if you want to share a couple of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, some of this is going to sound morbid and uncomfortable, especially when your person is still alive. And this is stuff you may or may not share with your loved one. It just depends where their head is at. Fortunately, in my case, I could tell my husband anything. And he actually started in on the dark humor within an hour of his diagnosis. So we're both wired a little bit differently, that
I
we
love
handle
that.
things through humor. So the first thing we always had this running joke of who was going to die first, because neither of us wanted to die first. We live without the
Yeah.
other one. So when I walked in, he looked at me and he put his hands up and he goes, "I win." I so was not ready for that joke. And then he's like, "Oh, too soon?" And he's like, "Come on, I need you to catch up with me because nobody else
Oh,
understands my humor." So just know that, some of these recommendations, that's the place that I'm coming from. Pick out a funeral home well before your loved one dies. Definitely to pay attention to estate planning and end of life care, a medical power of attorney, and have very specific conversations about what sort of interventions they want and do not want. And then be sure that you have that paperwork with you, because if a medical emergency does arrive, the the natural response is you just get in the car and go. You need to have that paperwork with you, even if you're the spouse. Some of that, depending on the situation, you don't need as a spouse, but some of it you do, and it just saves some angst and time and having to send someone back to your house to get that paperwork. It also will give you some peace in making those final decisions or having those discussions with medical personnel that this is what your person wants. For me, that was a huge blessing and saved me from a lot of self-inflicted guilt that, we all
mm,
give ourselves after someone dies, playing shoulda. I knew exactly what Michael wanted and didn't want and was able to execute his wishes without putting a whole lot of my feelings on it or wanting a different outcome, because we're always going to want more time with our people.
yeah.
That's just how we're wired. Um, definitely look out for yourself and take care of yourself, which feels selfish. It feels counterintuitive. Um, my focus was just completely on his care. Like I said, that's also important. Also, if you have time, and hopefully a lot of people do, is when you're getting toward the end and there's more medical visits, and this might be a conversation with a palliative medicine doctor, or if you have a friend who's in the medical profession, understand the different levels of care, such as in hospital versus hospice, and the impact of what happens at the end of life, and decide where they're going to hospice. If they're going to hospice at home, and if they hospice at home, then they're going to pass away at home, or facility where people can hospice, versus the hospital. Because there is some paperwork and financial implications when you sign hospice papers in the hospital, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. And most facilities tend to focus on the bereavement services and the services that hospice offers, not necessarily the tactical next steps of what's going to happen. So if you have all of that lined out beforehand and have a plan, it's much less stressful.
So good, because I'm just even thinking through things right now that, and certainly you want to honor the person's wishes, but I've worked with the grieving people on the other side, and I know for most people, when someone passes away in your home, it's a harder thing. Like for most people that are grieving on the other side, their home then becomes an uncomfortable place. Like it isn't a comforting thing that they passed away. For the person who's passing away, it may be very comfortable for them to pass away in their home. But then when you're still living in that home and you're passing the living room or bedroom, wherever, for a lot of people, that's a very hard thing. And so just to stop and think through that for a minute on both sides, and to proactively think through, okay, if they want to pass away at home, then what's going to be your plan or strategy afterwards in that home to make it livable again, or need to move again, or whatever. And I just feel compelled to interject my wish. If you're watching this video and you're dealing with anticipatory grief and your person is preparing to pass, and the conversations you have, I want to encourage you, I want to implore you actually to make a commitment to your person that you will recover. I know that you may talk about that they want that for you, and you may hear them say that they want you to move on and learn to be happy again, but if you will make a commitment to them, that is going to be a powerful tool for you on the other side of it. Because so many of us, we really wrestle and grapple with this idea of moving forward and is it wrong to be happy and all this kind of stuff. But I feel like if you make a promise to them that you are going to figure out how to do it, it's such a way to honor them and your commitment to them. So I just would encourage you, even if in the moment and as you're preparing, you can't imagine life without them, you have no idea how you're going to do it, it seems like so far-fetched and impossible, but I just want to encourage you to find the courage and strength to make a commitment to them that you will figure out a way to live again, that you are not going to die right along with them. You're going to do the work required for that. But this is all good stuff, and it's all very weird stuff to have to think through, to think through, how am I going to feel if my husband comes home and dies in my living room?
Yeah, this is stuff that we don't think about, and
right.
You don't know this stuff until you go through it. Michael was very specific that he did not want to die at home. Michael is 6'4" and 240 pounds. There is no way I could have taken care of him at home physically, even with the best, hospital equipment that hospice could bring in. And most people don't have medical equipment in their home. And usually toward the end of life, there's some sort of equipment that's needed. So you have to think about the practical side of it. If your husband is 200 pounds more than you are, it may not be feasible to take care of them. So you have to ask lots and lots of questions about expectations and levels of service and when equipment will be delivered and what equipment. And the more that you can iron that out beforehand, just the smoother and easier it's going to be on you. So that gave me peace to know that he didn't want to die at home. And it was for a number of reasons. He knew I couldn't have physically taken care of him, but he also did not want our house to have that memory in it.
Right.
And I think a lot of people feel that way. I think that was just as important to him as I wouldn't have been able to take care of him. Part of it is,
Right.
to not have that memory, in our house.
It's very wise and insightful and, on his part for sure. I mean, it's just kind of a Twilight Zone experience, right? To have to think about all these things and make decisions that you would never think you would have to make. And the other thing that I find comforting, I'm working with another woman that lost her child, and what she told herself throughout her recovery process is, I'm not the first parent to lose a child. Because the other part that's kind of bananas about all this is that this has been happening since the beginning of time, and spouses have been losing spouses since the beginning of time, and parents have been losing children. And this is not new. This is not unique to us. Somehow people have gone before us and done these things, and we too can do it. So
I told myself the same thing, that I'm not the first person to lose my spouse, and I certainly am not going to be the last. I wouldn't say that it's tremendously comforting, but it definitely interjects a dose of realism. And then your next thought is usually, well, why aren't we better equipped at dealing with this? Spoiler alert, we're all going to die. Why aren't we better at dealing with this and talking about it and knowing what to do? It's because we're afraid of it.
It never ceases to amaze me. It's literally the only thing that we all have in common on this planet. It's the only true common ground that there is on this planet, is that we can all plan on that. At some point, all of us will experience it, and then we all experience losing loved ones. But it also, I think, more than any topic, who will talk about politics, and we'll talk about sex, and we'll talk about all these things, but nobody wants to talk about death, because until you're affected by it, people who haven't been through loss live in this delusional fairyland that it will never happen to them, and it will never happen to the people that they love. And we're all happy to live in that delusional bubble until our bubble gets burst. And then when those of us that know, we know. And now you really could divide the world into two camps, like those who've been through it and those who have yet to go through it, because they will go through it. But our inability to talk about it and to support people well and to recover from it even. Like, I think today in our country, especially, we do not do a good job. The lion's share of people really don't recover, and they stay in some flavor of perpetual brokenness, right? And they just are constantly looking towards the past and defending and justifying why they're broken. So there's tremendous room for growth and opportunity, and for us to do it better, and hence these conversations. So I hope, viewer, if you've made it this far into the video, I hope that you're finding people who get it, people who've been through what you're facing, and I hope you receive a seed of hope that you're not alone and that you can get through it to the other side. And there can be bright days and even bright seasons ahead of you. There can be additional chapters that are meaningful and joyful and honoring to your loved one. Just because we move forward doesn't mean we don't bring them with us. We bring them with us into every new adventure and thing that we do, because their lives have imprinted on our lives, and now everything we do has a little flavor of them with us. So we never leave our people behind. But as always, Vicki, I'm so thankful for you. You just have such like a sound wisdom and practical way of approaching things, and I think that's appreciated for so many people. I'll leave you with the last word. If there's any last word that you want to share or encouragement for folks who are watching this video and in your shoes.
I would just like to add to what you said about how we take our people forward. There's a saying that the best way to honor someone is to take on the character attributes or things that they used to do to honor them, and that does help.
100%. You know, there's this saying going around that says grief shows that you loved, right? And I would argue to grieve shows that you loved the person you lost, but to learn to move forward shows that you know that they loved you too, right? If they love you, they want to know that you're happy and healthy and living your best life. And so, yeah, it's going to hurt because you love the person you lost, but love them enough to learn how to move forward and to live in a way that you actually enjoy and is honoring of them.
Absolutely. Like if our people came back and saw us in pain or stuck in our pajamas,
wallowing,
no, that wouldn't make them happy. Not at all. They want us to be happy and have a joy-filled life and fulfill whatever our new purpose is going to be.
Yeah, 100%. Well, we hope this video has blessed you. If you want other tips and tools, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And as promised, we will, once we put the comprehensive guide together, we will put a link to that below. We also have a link to speak with somebody on our team. If you're wanting to know more about the programs and products that we offer to help as it relates to grief recovery, be sure to check that out as well. Until next time, guys, we will see ya.